Headmaster Salix had experienced a roller coaster of emotions as he watched the new student, Aria Novak, tear through hollow opponents like a quarin at a Zephyr fruit festival. His initial horror quickly turned to anger when he discovered that Professor Clix had not only encouraged her, but had foolishly activated full-contact combat. Of course, he had profusely apologized to Miss Novak for the Holo Gym teacher's actions and insisted on calling her father to collect her. He brought everyone to his office to explain to the parent that this would never happen again. The school could ill afford another scandal or lawsuit. While allowing the human child to shower and change, he had used the time to express his disappointment in Professor Clix's. The strange, tentacled Orinek seemed more upset that his experiment had ended than by the fact that he could have potentially endangered a student. All of those emotions were now gone, burned away and replaced with something new and all-consuming. As he stared into the cold, impassive eyes of Colonel Novak, he felt dread. The Zephyrian continued to apologize, concerned that his guest had said nothing so far. His luminescent skin wasn't even flickering with alarm at hearing his child had been endangered. So you see, Professor Klexex, he gestured to the pale octopod in the corner, is deeply sorry for his actions. I promise you this will be brought before the Academy's governing body for review, and he will be punished appropriately. The headmaster swallowed hard. The human had simply stared at him as he spoke, and even now he felt the expectant gaze drawing more words forth as he babbled to fill the silence. Obviously, if you feel you cannot trust us, we understand. Should you no longer wish Aria to attend, we... No, the Holo Gym teacher cried out. She's a prodigy. We need her to beat Nebula Military Academy in the end-of-year games. Professor Clix, the headmaster, exclaimed. You wish to further endanger the child? I will not allow it. Victor slowly turned his head to look at his daughter, who sat by the door to the office. She gave him an apologetic look and shrugged. He returned his attention to the tall, iridescent blue headmaster. So, she's not in trouble? Headmaster Salax was taken aback by the question. No, of course not. She is a victim of teacher misconduct. Why would she? And, she's not injured, the human asked, keeping his voice calm and even. No, thank the stars, the headmaster was certain he'd explained all of this at some length. Fortunately, I came to collect her, as the physical tests should have been over and she had not been returned to my care. But she could have been, and that is what we are here to discuss. In a Holo Gym, Victor raised a single eyebrow. No hard light has ever killed anyone. It can't generate enough force. Most it could have done is give her a few bruises, maybe broken a rib if she was careless. He turned to look at his daughter. You get hit, she quickly shook her head, and he gave her a single nod of approval. I don't understand why you called me away from my work for this. The Zephyrian realized that the humans might lack the technology to generate a suitably strong hard light field. Perhaps our Holo Gyms differ. We have unfortunately had several casualties during training, and one fatality. Colonel Novak's interest was piqued. Technology like that could prove useful in his line of work, and he was sure Earth's military would pay handsomely for it. That does change things somewhat. Earth's hard light maxes out at around 2,000 newtons. The headmaster used the computer terminal in front of him to convert the force measurement. Well, that can't be correct. That is more than twice the force output of our projectors. Victor leaned back in his seat once again. It was another dead end. Everything they had encountered since meeting the UGA had been inferior to what Earth and their allies already produced. Slower ships, laughable weapons, and a military he was fairly certain could be overwhelmed by one of Earth's smaller trading conglomerates. This was part of the reason humanity had chosen a very slow introduction to the galactic stage. Perhaps the conversion is wrong. He tried to steer the conversation away from comparative technology. Regardless, Aria is fine, and your teachers are yours to discipline. Is there anything else? The Zephyrian was still unsure of the human's intentions. So, you do not plan to bring legal action against the Academy or Professor Clixix for endangering your daughter? The human took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. I doubt she was in any real danger. I'm sure Professor Clix had everything in hand, or tentacle. He has a distinguished record as an instructor with the Orinek military before joining your academy 3 years ago. He doesn't even have so much as a minor flight violation on his record. The Orinek Holo Gym teacher perked up at his impromptu review, unwrapping his tentacles from comforting each other. That's right, he wanted to ask how the human knew those things about him, but as the man was arguing in his favor, he decided to let it go unsaid. All student injuries happened under my predecessor. There's never been a serious injury on my watch. The headmaster had been prepared for an angry parent, for being forced to grovel and plead to avoid a diplomatic incident. The human had been most agreeable and only mildly irritated at having his work interrupted for something he found trivial. He considered the possibility that species 368 was simply not attached to their young like other races. He felt a pang of empathy for the small auburn-haired child. So, you are happy for her to continue under our guidance, despite Professor Clix's actions? The kids need to be challenged. Victor looked over his shoulder at Aria once again, then back to the headmaster. And it sounds like Professor Clix was simply fulfilling his role in gauging her aptitude. Speaking of which, how did she do on the other tests? There was a small groan from the child, and Headmaster Salax wondered if Colonel Novak was the sort of parent who valued mental education over the physical. Excellent scores all round, surprisingly so in some subjects. I'm impressed that you incorporate so much of the United Galactic Assembly's history into your education programs so soon after joining. Combined with her tolerances for standard gravity, atmosphere, thermal range and other factors, she would normally place in our most advanced class. Normally Victor narrowed his eyes and leaned forward. What does that mean? Well, Ahem the tall, iridescent blue Zephyrian shifted uncomfortably under the human's gaze. We have other students to consider, and your daughter, he struggled to find a polite way to put things. Professor Clix filled the gap. He's worried she'll kill another student. Colonel Novak's eyes fell on the squishy Orinic, and he hastily tempered his answer. Accidentally. Victor was visibly irritated, but calm. My daughter. The headmaster tried to explain. You see, with so many students there are always frictions. We wouldn't want a heated exchange getting out of hand, would we? The impassive human tilted his head, looking hard at the alien educator. Headmaster Salax felt he was being assessed. She will still receive the finest education as a member of Class 7 billion. No, Professor Clix exclaimed. Not the bubbles. Professor Clix, the Zephyrian, scolded. We do not allow the students to use that name, so please do not repeat it again. Victor closed his eyes for a moment, then, taking a deep breath, asked the obvious question. Bubbles. Enviropods, Headmaster Salax said cautiously. Some of the students require different atmospheres, gravity and thermal conditions. These pods allow them to be safe and comfortable in a personal protective pod. Victor didn't like the sound of this. Aria doesn't need protection, I've made sure of that. Ah, yes. Ahem, the headmaster fidgeted, tapping his fingers together. In this instance, it would be for the protection of our other students. I see. The human male paused, considering what this meant. Humans were used to being careful around other races, as the two that had shared their space were both more fragile than his own species. He had wondered where humans ranked physically, and now it would seem that it was quite highly. You feel this is necessary? Unfortunately, yes. Headmaster Salax was really starting to feel quite nervous, at least for the first semester, until we see how well she adapts to those around her. We need to understand human temperament better. Are you evolutionary pacifists, like my own people, or more quick to anger like the Gorlan, Folix or Grashna? Victor nodded in understanding. He had gotten into his fair share of fights growing up. Lucky for you, she takes after her mother. A momentary flicker of a smile crossed his face. I'm sure she can tough it out for one semester. He turned to look at his daughter. That okay with you? Aria gave a single nod. It hardly made a difference to her which class she would be in. Anyway, it seemed to her that the decision was already made, and she certainly did not want to go through another day of boring tests to get into an alternative school. At least here she was given a good lunch, better than any previous school had ever provided. Moving so often, she'd learned what was important at a new school. Friends were rare and fleeting, but decent food was something you could appreciate regardless of the company you kept. The headmaster was most relieved. Then it is settled. We can. One small thing. The human father half raised his hand to halt the conclusion. Yes. I'd like to inspect the holo gym before I leave. Victor smiled warmly. And I think I'd like to stop by and observe from time to time. The young auburn-haired girl's shoulders sagged, and she stared hard at the back of her dad's head, trying to force the word no into his thick skull. The headmaster seemed to be considering these demands, so she switched her attempted telepathy to him, pleading for him to refuse. Headmaster Salax responded, "Cosmic Crest Academy does not usually allow parents to visit," and Aria's heart sang for joy. However, he added, crashing her hopes like a rock to the floor, "I think we could make the occasional exception, in light of recent events." For the headmaster and the school's governing body, a minor rule being ignored to allow a nervous parent to check in was preferable to legal action, or worse, a diplomatic incident. Excellent, Colonel Novak stood. "Then I will accompany Professor Klix for a tour of his facility," he turned to Aria. "Why don't you go to the shuttle? Lion is waiting. You can tell him I'll be a little longer." Aria quickly gathered her things, happy to be avoiding her dad's interrogation of the unfortunate Professor Klix. The headmaster stood, realizing the meeting had been concluded, and he should probably say something. "Well, I'd like to thank you for coming so quickly. I'm glad things were resolved so amenably." He hastily turned to the holo gym teacher. "Please show Colonel Novak the holo gym and answer his questions." The corridors were empty as the young girl walked briskly towards the exit, classes having ended shortly after her father had arrived. The headmaster had offered to walk her out, but she had politely refused. By the time she opened the doors to take in some fresh air, her tie and blazer were already in her bag and her top shirt button undone. Leaning against the shuttle was Lian Chen, her father's right-hand man for as long as she could remember. "Uncle Lian," she broke into a run, and he stepped away from the shuttle, scooping her up into a hug as she reached him. As her feet touched the ground, she asked, "When did you arrive?" "Oh, about an hour before the school called." He took a step back and looked her up and down. "You've grown again. I told you to stop doing that. You're making me feel old." She smiled and was about to tell him how much gray was now mixed into his neat black hair when he cut her off. "Jump in. I brought you a treat from home." She opened her big brown eyes wide, and he laughed. "Here go ice cream. You wouldn't believe how hard it was to get it through customs." He opened the shuttle door and she leapt inside. "Actually, it was stupidly easy. I hid it in a weapons crate. Honestly, this UGA. Bunch of terrible security. They failed all but our most basic tests." Aria tore into the cryopack, and as the cool air rushed out, she let out a happy sigh. "Nice hiss," they both said in unison. The man slid into the seat beside her. "You should probably have waited till after you got home." "Dad's taking a tour of the holo gym." Aria took a small spoonful of ice cream. "It's pretty good, like the old Holosim Pro we had on Centauri base, but much easier." Lian sighed. They were having to bring in everything they could from Earth to meet their needs. Who cares? It's just more junk. The auburn-haired girl swallowed the ice cream, after letting it slowly melt on her tongue. Taking another spoonful, she offered it to the man, who smiled and shook his head. "I think he's more interested in Professor Klix. He's a former military instructor." The dark-haired man groaned. "The Orinek? Oh God, we'll be here for hours." He then took the spoon from the young girl and helped himself to a scoop of ice cream. As he handed her back the empty spoon, he asked, "So, you gonna tell me why your dad got called here, on your first day?" She screwed up her nose. "He was wearing one of the pins you make. You already know everything." He laughed loudly, taking the spoon once more and helping himself to a second, bigger scoop of ice cream. "Good to see you were paying attention." She rolled her eyes, taking back her spoon. "I've had enough tests today." Ian pinched the bridge of his nose. "You'll have to report to your dad and answer his questions." He saw her visibly deflate. "Or, maybe, I can keep your dad talking about work after we eat, and you can slip away." The child immediately smiled broadly at the prospect of an evening of freedom. He grunted and closed his eyes tightly. Aria wagged her spoon at him. "You always eat ice cream too quickly, Uncle Lian. You have to savor it." "When did you become so wise in the ways of ice cream?" He snatched the spoon, taking another oversized mouthful. "Perseverance, secret of all triumphs." With a confused look, she watched as his face contorted with the agony of brain freeze. "Victor Hugo? You sound like Dad." She made a stern face and lowered her voice. "Bravery is being the only one who knows you're afraid. Or, it doesn't get easier, you just get stronger." "It's good to know you were listening." Victor Novak's voice caused them both to jump. "Lian, why are you feeding her ice cream?" Sorry, Victor, the suited man took the ice cream and hastily pushed it back into the cryopack, resealing it and pressing the charge button, which released a puff of cold air. Got to spoil the kid after her first day at a new school. The tall man got into the pilot's seat. The pin worked. None of their systems detected it. We'll issue them to everyone tomorrow. He began the initializing process for the shuttle. Turning, he looked closely at his daughter. Professor Klicksex showed me your pistol test time. He was very impressed. Good work, kid. Uncle Leon fist bumped Aria. Care to explain? Her father asked, as he turned to face the controls again. The shuttle smoothly lifted from the ground. It was almost a second off your average. He paused, as though waiting for an answer, but then spoke again. The range was installed today. I want you to do an hour tonight, after the debriefing. Your skills are tools, and left unused, they rust. The auburn-haired girl nodded smartly. Leon, meanwhile, shook his head. Victor, she's a kid. Had a long day at another new school, and she's been put in the bubbles. Maybe you should give her the night off. Victor Novak turned the shuttle into the main flow, heading towards their new home. I'll make you both a deal. We'll go to the range first, and if you can beat your average time, in 3 attempts, you get the night off. In the back of the car, Aria and Uncle Leon shared another fist bump. As they flew towards their temporary residence, Aria's mind wandered back to the events of the day. She had expected her first day at Cosmic Crest Academy to be challenging, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. The academic tests, while initially easy, had quickly become a frustrating maze of alien concepts and histories she had no way of knowing. And then there was the physical assessment. She glanced at her father, his face impassive as he piloted the shuttle. She knew he was proud of her performance, even if he rarely showed it, but she also knew that pride came with expectations that sometimes felt overwhelming. Uncle Leon, she said quietly, what do you think about the bubbles? Leon looked at her, his eyes softening with understanding. It's a tricky situation, kiddo. On one hand, it's a bit insulting that they think you need to be separated from the other students. On the other hand, it might give you a chance to observe without being observed yourself. Could be useful. Aria nodded, considering his words. She had always been good at blending in, at making herself invisible when she needed to. Maybe the bubbles could be an advantage in disguise. The shuttle began its descent towards a nondescript building that served as their current safe house. As they landed, Victor turned to face his daughter and Leon. Aria, I want a full report on everything you observed today. Every student, every teacher, every piece of technology. Leon, start analyzing the data from the pin. I want to know everything their systems missed. As they exited the shuttle, Aria couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. This wasn't just school, it was a mission, one that could have far-reaching consequences for humanity's place in the galaxy. The range, as it turned out, was in the basement of their safe house. State-of-the-art Earth technology mixed seamlessly with reverse-engineered alien tech, creating a training facility that would make most military installations jealous. Aria stood at the firing line, the familiar weight of the pistol in her hand, providing a strange comfort after a day of alien encounters. She took a deep breath, centering herself as her father had taught her. Remember, Victor's voice came over the intercom. Speed is important, but accuracy is vital. You miss, you die. You hesitate, someone else dies. Aria nodded, her face set in concentration. The targets appeared, and she moved. To Leon, watching from the observation room with Victor, it was like watching a dance. Aria flowed from target to target, her movements precise and economical. The pistol barked rhythmically, each shot finding its mark with unerring accuracy. As the last target fell, the timer stopped. Victor looked at the readout, his eyebrows raising slightly, the only indication of his surprise. Well, he said, his voice carefully neutral, it seems you've earned your night off. Aria allowed herself a small smile as she safed her weapon and placed it on the bench. She had beaten her average time by a full half-second. Later that evening, as Aria lay in her bed, she reflected on the day's events. Cosmic Crest Academy was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a microcosm of the wider galaxy that humanity was just beginning to explore. And she, Aria Novak, was at the forefront of that exploration. She thought about the other students she had glimpsed, the strange and wonderful beings that would be her classmates. She thought about the challenges that lay ahead, both academic and physical. And she thought about the responsibility she carried, not just as a student, but as a representative of her entire species. As sleep began to claim her, Aria's last thoughts were of the future. Tomorrow, she would return to Cosmic Crest, not just as a student, but as a pioneer, blazing a trail for future generations of humans in the galactic community. The adventure had only just begun, and Aria Novak was ready for whatever the universe might throw at her.